Hi everyone, this is Diva from Blood Hunter, and you're listening to the Metal Pit podcast.
Welcome to the Metal Pit podcast, where we delve deep into the albums and bands that shaped metal. Please visit us on our social media sites, Facebook and Instagram at the Metal Pit. And of course, visit our website, themetalpit.org, and on our YouTube channel, which is at the Metal Pit 666. And we also have an email for the podcast, which is podcast@themetalpit.org. If you have any comments or album suggestions or complaints or whatever you want to say. I am your host, Blake, and I run the Metal Pit website, and I've had it for many years, which I've probably said that before. And today, whatever, is our first podcast where we've had 4 people on the panel, I guess we'll call it. And I have 3 of my writers at the Metal Pit. I have Jim, Billy, and Kenneth. So how is everybody tonight?
Good, sir. I'm ready to go.
Oh, good.
Okay, this is our 30th episode and the 27th one where we discuss an album, because we've had a few interviews, and we had a whacking interview with Billy there a week ago or so ago. Now, this is only the second Canadian band we have featured. The other was Rush, which was the only episode I haven't been on, actually, with Georgina and Christina talked about Rush. But some people would probably not call Rush heavy metal, so I'm going to say this is our first real Canadian heavy metal band that we've been talking about. And we're going to talk about Annihilator today. Well, we're going to talk about Jeff Waters, who is the main man, and his band Annihilator. But before we start talking about Annihilator, I wanted to ask these guys about, because we usually ask about how you got into heavy metal. So we've all done that before, I believe, on an episode. So we're going to ask how you've all got into Canadian heavy metal, or maybe Canadian hard rock that led to heavy metal later. So let's start with, who am I going to start with? I'm going to start with Nova Scotia and Jim. Maybe he's got a different view because he lives out east. I don't know.
Probably because we don't get a lot of action out here, but Canadian bands, I guess it would go back to obviously not necessarily a heavy metal, but more like a 1980 Loverboy album I think I got for Christmas. Before I'd gotten into like Judas Priest and that sort of thing. Helix in 1984, Walking the Razor's Edge. I mean, I've seen Helix like 4 times, and going back, to the early Triumph albums. And I mean, what I love about Triumph is they've come to Halifax and they do they used to do full on Canadian tours when they were together, and it was really cool. First time I saw them was in '84 for the Thunder 7 tour. But I mean, I heard their stuff earlier than that. Because their stuff, it's all through the late 70s and that. Styx was another one, that album. I think it was 83. Kilroy was here. Bands like Toronto, and April Wine. I mean, April Wine, I've probably seen a ton of times because they're usually like part of we have a lot of festivals here that are on Citadel Hill. And they're usually like even New Year's festivals and stuff like that, where they're doing all kinds of, usually April Wine back in the 80s and 90s and even into the 2000s were always one of the bands that were always a solid attendance there. So a lot of that I listened to back then. And then obviously I got into, as I said before, I got into metal with Judas Priest, and after Sin accidentally buying that album as part of my I was buying what was it there, Saturday Night Fever albums, and it was one of the ones stuffed in. So and then that kind of got me more into heavy metal right around the time Kill 'Em All and that came out from Metallica. So that's about it.
Kenneth, how about you?
I mentioned this before, but my dad used to build speaker cabinets for Yorkville Sound. So being a cabinet speaker maker, he knew a lot of bands. So like when I was a kid, he knew Lighthouse, he knew April Wine, and that was my first introduction to kind of like Canadian metal as well. I guess the first really big band that I started listening to was, of course, Triumph, like Jim, Thunder 7, and all the early, like all the earlier Triumph albums are pretty much are all pure classics. I liked Rush too. I knew Rush at the time, but for me, I really got into Triumph. I was a huge Rick Emmett fan. Loved his guitar playing. So yeah, I think Triumph was the first major Canadian band that I liked. But then it's built into like Sacrifice and a whole bunch of other Killer Dwarfs too. They're a band that I really really liked as well. So yeah, that was my introduction. Was basically April Wine, and it kind of led to Triumph.
And how about you, Billy?
Yeah, so really there was one band for me that started it all, and that was actually Helix. So 1984, Walking the Razor's Edge. I mean, and that's also right around when I got into music, like late 83, 84. So didn't really listen to much, like, loved Rush and loved Triumph, but all that came later as I really dived into music and exploring different bands. So yeah, 1984, Helix, Walking the Razor's Edge, really not only started Canadian metal, but started my whole metal journey. So yeah, good times.
Now, well, for me, it was, now I'm a few years older than the rest of the guys here. So, and I ask these questions, I say, I'm going to ask this question, and then I think to myself, well, I don't even remember how to answer this because I can't remember myself. But, but I know that I would hear the songs on the radio, of course, April Wine, which has been mentioned, and the Headpins once they came out, and Street Heart, and Teenage Head, who I guess is punk. They call them punk. They didn't sound punk to me. But anyway, I had their Some Kind of Fun album, and I still listen to that regularly. I still, probably because that's one of the albums I had first in my life of listening to albums, was that Teenage Ed album. So I listened to it so much when I was 14 or 15, whatever it was, before I discovered heavy metal. So I just kept listening to it because I still like it. But then, of course, yeah, then I think Anvil came next, I think, for me. I mean, of course, I did also listen to the bands you already mentioned. Triumph, of course. I like Triumph. And we already mentioned. And then Helix. I don't know if if I would have heard Helix before Thrash. I forget. Yeah, I guess I would have. Yeah. I think I listened to No Rest for the Wicked. Might have been the first Helix album I heard, I believe. And then, of course, Walking the Razor's Edge with Rock You on it. But yeah, then the thrash bands came out like Exciter and Sacrifice and Razor, which we've already talked about. And then, of course, I was going to mention the Canada's first female metal person was Lee Aaron, even though if you listen to her albums now, you wouldn't really think should be called metal, of course. But back then, since she was wearing leather and had chains on and had a song called Metal Queen and an album called Metal Queen, of course, she became a metal queen. And I just had one little funny thing to say about that. She was playing at the Western Fair in like a bar that they had at the Western Fair in London, Ontario. And me and some friends were just sitting at our table with some other people. And this guy who looked like he had a few drinks before we got there, but he had a Voivod shirt on. And he looks at me and he goes, "Hey, do you know what this says?" Pointing at his shirt. And I said, "Yeah, it says Voivod." He goes, "Oh, you speak French, do you?" I went, "No, I don't speak French. I know who Voivod is." I guess he thought I was just a Lee Aaron fan and I didn't listen to any other music or something. I don't know, but he didn't look like he liked females singing metal or something, because he took his cassette tape that they gave away and pulled all the tape out and threw it on stage. But anyway, that was just a funny story, because we also almost did a Voivod album for this one instead of Annihilator. So I would have told that story in that episode too. So anyway, now let's talk Annihilator. Briefly, a quick bio here. They were formed in 1984 in Ottawa, Ontario. They have released 17 studio albums and have had about 200 different band members. Okay, I'm joking. It's not that many, but I did count on Wikipedia. It's been 39 members, which is a lot. Let's see. Most cases, whenever I read about people leaving the band, it was always for musical differences. So I'm not sure if that's true or they just didn't want to say anything bad about Jeff Waters or what the deal is there. And the album we're going to talk about is their debut album, Alice in Hell, released in 1989. So for you guys, I'll start with Billy, I guess. When did you first hear Annihilator, and was it this album that you first heard Annihilator?
Yeah, no, definitely this album. I am pretty sure to be for those of us who are in Canada, Much Music's Pepsi Power Hour. So the video for Alice in Hell was, I'm pretty sure, was where I discovered them, and I remember rushing out to purchase the album. So yeah, just a great track that caught me immediately and caught my attention right away. So yeah, that's where I got him, right at the dead beginning for sure.
And Kenneth?
Yeah, but I'm like Billy about the same time. Although when they toured their first album with Testament on Practice What You Preach, it got a lot of reviews and a lot of write-ups. So yeah, I knew about them at that time. So, but I caught them at the very beginning too, and went out and bought the album as soon as I had like heard about it. And yeah, it's pretty much a classic right from the get-go.
And Jim, when was this album also?
Absolutely. First album, I fell in love with it. 1989, I would have been just graduating high school, right into thrash at that point. And then this just, again, right on the Pepsi Power Hour, they were playing it in massive rotation because it was a Canadian band. And I remember at the record store, we had Sam the Record Man in the mall here, and it had a massive display of it as soon as it was released. And it was, and I mean, that video was amazing, a great hook. That song just got you in there. All my buddies in that just, this new band, and they're Canadian too. I mean, I was already in love with Voivod at that point, but this was just something really different and really, really, really thrashy. It was awesome.
And I think like Billy saw the Alice in Hell video on Much Music, and with Kenneth, I think you all mentioned it. But yeah, I believe that is when I first heard about them too, and probably yes, when I bought the album. I don't really remember. I noticed I don't have any vinyls of Annihilator. I just have CDs, but I have a lot of CDs. But for some reason, I never got their vinyls. Maybe it was hard to get or something. So anyway, on this album, the band is. The vocalist was Randy Rampage, who sang on this album, and then he didn't sing on another album till their 7th album, Criteria for a Black Widow. So he sang 10 years apart on an album for some reason. The drummer was Ray Hartman, and the rest of everything else was Jeff Waters. Now, on the album, it is credited that the bass player was Wayne Darley and the rhythm guitarist was Anthony Brian Greenham, but that says it's a mistake and that they joined the band, but they weren't on the album actually.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about
bass on the album, I believe.
Pardon?
Jeff played bass on the album.
Yes,
I'm pretty sure.
Yes, it had a whole, like on Wikipedia, it had a whole list of things that he did.
Yeah.
Like guitar, bass, whatever, everything, backing vocals, all this other stuff. So yes, I believe he did the bass, and I guess he would do the rhythm guitar too over his lead guitar. Yeah. So we're going to start with the songs now. I'm not going to bother talking about the short instrumental. We'll just get right into Alice. And now this always confused me when I first heard this, because the album is called Alice in Hell, but the song is called Alice in Hell. Anyway. So let's see, Jimmy, how about the song Alice in Hell?
Oh, I mean, this is the song that started it all. It's awesome. I mean, so fast, and the vocals are amazing. And I think that's what grabs you with this album, and even the next album after this, which I absolutely love as well. And, it's a great, I like that too. It was Alice in Hell, the album, and this was Allison in Hell. So it was really, really cool. I mean, the video was great. And, Cradle of Filth does a great cover of this. I mean, a massive cover of this. Really, really do a good job on I think it was on a 2017 album. And it gave it a massive homage. Sounded great.
Yes, I've heard that a bunch of times because I had a bunch of Cradle of Filth albums. Kenneth, I know we all like the song because we all already talked about it, that we heard it first.
Let me back up for a sec, Blake. I think you missed a good opportunity at the beginning, because Crystal Ann is actually a really good lead-in. I know it's an instrumental. It's kind of haunting. It's beautiful. It has clear production on it. It's very much, to me, like an 80s horror film. It leads in, because I always felt that this album, to me, I just equate it to Nightmare on Elm Street because of the cover and because of some of the song titles. So Crystal Land to me is really the perfect lead-in to that song. They go hand in hand, and then you get this insane start to a song that basically doesn't let up, and not even that, but just for the fact that Randy has such snarly vocals and the high shrieks. And obviously, to me, he's doing his best at Dave Mustaine impression, because he almost sounds a lot like Dave Mustaine. The way he enunciates words, the way he snarls in certain phrases. It's very obvious that, and I know there was a lot of comparisons from Annihilator to Megadeth back in the early days, but that song is, those two songs, like the beginning and the song, are perfect. The perfect opening for this record, as far as I'm concerned.
And Billy?
Yeah, so I totally agree that Crystal Ann, I almost view the two songs together, but yeah, I just think it's a great song. Like when I think of this song, it's like, it's menacing and sinister, and it just sets the stage. Like Jeff's guitar playing, just that crunching guitar, and his killer solos. Just a perfect song. It really is, it sort of defines the band. And I guess just an interesting point, like having seen Annihilator many times, probably like 2015, 16, Jeff, I was watching them in Germany, and Jeff made the comment, I guess I feel bad for him having to play this every time, but I think he said something to the extent of, okay, let me get this damn song over with, because nobody's going to let me out of here if I don't play it. So they played Alice in Hell. So he was probably a bit tired of playing it, but it really is a brilliant song. So I'm glad they play it every time.
And that was that whacking then you're talking about, right?
Yeah. Like Jeff play Annihilator, because I think someone mentioned it. Annihilator are huge in Europe. Everywhere I see them in Europe, I mean, they bring in thousands and thousands of people. Even playing like small arenas in Europe, they're incredibly popular there.
Yeah. Another point there. On Crystal Land, you think about this was 1989. They put their instrumental song one. And a lot of these bands were burying kind of an instrumental farther back in the record a bit. So I think it was pretty ballsy to light into this. And it's almost kind of like Judas Priest with, Electric Eye and the Hellion. I consider it, like the guys said, one song.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry I skipped the instrumental. Usually when we have an instrumental on, nobody really knows what to say. So I guess I made a mistake on that one. Anyway, that's okay. But yeah, it is a good lead into Alice in Hell. Sorry. And yeah, that's one of my favorite. It's probably still my favorite Annihilator song. But again, it's the first one you hear. And I was talking to the other guys before Billy showed up before we started our chat. But usually I use a Wikipedia site. But I looked at it and it doesn't look like it's very accurate for Annihilator, as Alice in Hell is the top song they play, but it says they've only played it 400 times. And I'm sure they've played more than 400 concerts in 40 years, I would think. So I'm sure it must be played more than that. So I didn't bother keeping any stats from that site, as I figure it's not very up to date on Annihilator, because the site does go by people submitting set lists, and like you say, they're more popular than Europe than they are in his home country or in the United States either. So, and I was just reading one part here about Randy Rampage. He left Annihilator after the tour of this album because he wanted to keep his seniority at his job on the shipping docks in North Vancouver, because I guess he had priorities.
It was a union gig.
Probably.
Yeah, probably.
So anyway, then we go to, where am I here? Oh, WTYD, which I had this on in the car and I'm going, because it's been a while since I listened to the album. I'm going, what's that stand for? And then of course you hear Welcome to Your Death, of course. So Billy, what do you think of Welcome to Your Death?
Yeah, another great thrash song on the album. One of the more intense songs, probably, I would say. And it's interesting because Randy's vocal performance, he almost gets into death metal scream territory on this one in one or two places. So I always found that kind of interesting. So again, Jeff's songwriting. I mean, the song's like an intense, quick thrasher, but like at one point, he slows the song down. Some great guitar melodies and soloing, and then the song takes off again with all the chunky guitars. So just another great thrash song from this album. Love it.
Kenneth?
Yeah, I mean, everything Billy's saying is pretty accurate about that song. Again, to me, it rivals. It almost sounds like Megadeth to me. It just has that the driving rhythms, the stop, the starts, the middle portion of the song is actually really good. Um, and the snarly vocals. The thing about Randy is that his vocals, yeah, almost there is at times where he almost steers into death metal, and then he'll slow down, and then he'll go in that back to that snarly vocal sound, which to me, it's just so reminiscent of Dave Mustaine. You listen to a Megadeth song and then you listen to this, you can hear it. You can very much hear the style. Not that it was intentional, because I'm sure it's not, but he brought a very interesting dynamic to the band and to that song in particular, because it's kind of nasty, and it's a really really heavy song as well.
And Jim, do you have anything to add on that song?
Yeah, I mean, I get the feeling I agree with Kenneth. I agree with the guys. That Kenneth said it sounds like Megadeth. I find it more in the middle. Sounds like Megadeth. The start really sounds like an old school Metallica vibe to it when it starts up. But this would have been great. Like where he's borderlining on a death metal sound. I would have liked to hear a real full on like Morbid Angel right out there death metal from start to finish album project that they obviously could have easily done. I mean, I know they were a thrash band, but like band like Testament did it, and that would have been really really cool. And this song has got a lot of evidence in there that they would have been able to pull that off big time.
And he even did a little bit of that in Alice in Hell too, in the chorus and stuff. If it was, yeah. Anyway, now Wicked Mystic. I hope I got that right, Kenneth.
Yeah, this is a pretty good song. I almost feel like it's a throwback to, or a callback to, like Wasp, because if you read the lyrics and you try to interpret the song, it's almost basically like about, okay, is a person having sex, like kind of wild, unbridled, passionate sex, because you get like lyrics like lust and dripping wet. So I almost feel like the song's about fucking, at least to me. I mean, I'm just gonna come on and say it, but it's a great song as well. I like it. It's just, I hear the song, you hear how heavy, you hear the riffs. It's great for that. When you actually sit down and just listen to the lyrics, it's like, oh, maybe that's what he's saying. Well, that's what I got out of it. But it's a really, really good song as well. There's nothing wrong with that song at all.
Jim, do you get sex out of this too?
I gotta admit, some of the lyrics in there definitely pointed towards that. It's a fast song, and I mean, this has a huge sound to it. This is like exactly what Canadian thrash, American thrash. This is thrash 100,000%. I mean, this is a wicked song, and I agree with Kenneth with what he said there. It's got great lyrical content to it, and most of their songs do for sure. So
And Billy, you have anything to add on this song?
Yeah, no, I think the guys have said it. It's actually probably my third or fourth favorite track on the album. I think Randy is one of his better vocal tracks on the album, and again, it just Jeff's guitar work just stellar once again. So yeah, just another solid, great track on the album.
Now, the next song I think is the best title of a song on the album, and that is "Burns Like a Buzzsaw Blade." And I'm losing track of who I started with. Ken, we'll start with you. Sorry.
Yeah, this song is actually pretty good. I was, for some reason, I was thinking of Word Salad, but this song is pretty good too. It dips, it bends. it's methodical and like not methodical, but it's melodic. It's got a lot of playful aggression. I like the song. Again, lyrically, the buzzsaw, or the idea of the buzzsaw, it's kind of funny. Like, you know, it's maybe it's a bit cliched at times as well with some of the lyrics, but you know, that's what thrash is all about, right? Like just that playful heaviness and the lyrics. The lyrics is what I think stand out for this song for me.
And Billy?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add there is I think this is probably some of Jeff's where he exhibits the most versatility on the album. There's some really unique solos here. You know, sometimes I think, you know, I mean, one of his biggest influences was Eddie Van Halen. I can almost see a little bit of that in some of the more unique solos on this track. So yeah, a great track, but I do like the versatility in Jeff's playing on this one.
And Jim?
Yeah, not much to add to this other than I always got out of the song that I got a kind of a Venom feel to it. You know, and I really like it. Great solos. Another great song on this album. The follow up from the two guys there. That's pretty much it. It's a great song.
And word salad is like an appetizer for, I guess, craft dinner that they put out on the next album. But anyway, Jim, what do you think of word salad?
Oh, I love this song. This is probably my second favorite next to Alice in Hell. I mean, I think it's borderlines on a thrash masterpiece. I love it. I love how it starts off a little bit on the slower side, and then it just rips in. I mean, I like it. It's a great song. Great song.
Billy?
Actually, for me, like, I don't know if I'm going to be the outlier among the group, but it's probably probably my least favorite song. I do enjoy the song, but I guess the one part that doesn't quite click with me is Randy's singing on this one. Like when he gets into the pre-chorus, chorus, and he's singing a little cleaner or more melodic. I don't know. That just doesn't quite work with me. Not that I'm against like melodic vocals or more clean vocals, but like when he's just shouting sort of word salad, no ballads. I don't know. It just doesn't do it for me. And of course, that's an odd sort of thing to be shouting. I mean, word salad, no ballads. But I don't know. It just didn't click with me. But that said, Jeff saves the song just with his killer guitar playing again. But I don't know. Just the vocals don't click for me.
Well, the word salad, no ballad, I think the next album started the ballad, so I don't know if that has anything to do with it. But anyway, Kenneth, anything to add about word salad?
Yeah, well, the word salad is actually taken from a term for a sign of mental illness. So if somebody has like repetitive speech and they sound confused, it's what you would say word salad is someone who might be mentally unstable. But the lyrics, it's all about being mentally unstable and having seeing hallucinating and delusions, which again is like a staple for it's funny, it's a staple for all thrash metal. It's like one of the go-tos is mental illness. Let's write about mental illness. And this song has it in abundance. But I mean, I don't mind the vocals on this as much. The vocals are okay. I do agree that Jeff's playing here is superb, and he really, really adds a lot to the song itself. But I always like this song. I love the term what word salad means. So for me, it's probably my second favorite song on the album as well.
Actually, I was probably maybe going to mention this later, but it seems like like the other day I listened to like 9 Annihilator albums to refresh my memory and try to see what I liked about everything. And it's almost like every other song is about mental illness or an insane asylum or whatever. So he's definitely has some knowledge or interest in writing about that kind of stuff. So, and then the next song is called Schizos, which I think must have something to do with that too. Part 1 and 2. I'm not really sure what the part 1 and 2 means, but Jim, you want to start this one?
It's another great song. I mean, it's just a few words spoken with the repetitiveness of Schizos Are Never Alone. I mean, the musicianship on this is wicked. I think it's a great song. Probably in my probably in my top half of the album for sure. But no, I think it's a good song. And as I said, like the guitar on this is really, really good. It's a great the musicianship on it's spot on.
Billy?
Yeah, no, I mean, as Jim said, this is really all about the guitar. It's a Jeff show, and like I agree, they are speaking. Schizos are never alone, sort of in the background, but I largely view it as a instrumental track as a whole. But I think it works perfectly on the record, right? It's not like where you could get a guitarist who takes this abstract musical idea and drop it into the album. I mean, this totally fits within the context of the album. So I think it's in a perfect place in the album. And again, Jeff just steals the show. Love his guitar work here. And when you listen to it, particularly with headphones, there's some great bass lines that he does and sprinkles throughout that song. It's a cool one.
And Kenneth?
The guys have said it all pretty much. I agree with what everyone has said. Although for me, I know that from the lyrical standpoint, it's about a singer who hears voices. Now, is that Randy hearing the voices? Because that's what I'm getting out of it. But it's kind of an ingenious little song, 2 parts, which you get the first part, second part. It's sort of, they go hand in hand. But yeah, it's a very clever and kind of unique song, and it's perfectly placed on the album as far as I can see too.
And the next song, I'm not even sure how to say it. Does anybody know how to say it?
Yeah, Ligeia.
Okay. Well, then you start then.
Yeah,
you start then. Oh, okay.
Oh, sure. I can start. Yeah. So basically, it's Ligeia. It's based on the short story "The Tomb of Ligeia" by Edgar Allan Poe. It's a horror song. It's again it's a kind of song that's a staple for a lot of thrash bands, especially in the '80s. They were a lot of these thrash bands were preoccupied with horror. And oddly enough, for me, I love the song because not too many thrash bands would go to like a classic literature, maybe with the exception of Iron Maiden, of course, who use a lot of classic literature in their songs. But the Tomb of Ligeia. So basically, the song it's a nice song. Well, nice, but not mean in the sense that this guy, an unknown narrator, he marries this woman. He's enthralled and he's totally in love with her. She has like dark raven kind of dark hair. And then 2 months into the relationship, she develops illness. And then she spirals through anxiety and and all kinds of like a death spiral basically until she dies. And it's like his kind of lament. At least the author's lament in the song. So the song is great. I think it's a really powerful song.
And Billy?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's actually probably my second favorite track next to Alice in Hell, to be honest. Again, I just think it's a really great chorus, and it's somewhat catchy, and but you still get the heavy crunching guitars. Just a great song. I think Jeff did a great job on the songwriting on this one. I think it's a bit underrated on the album, I would say. It's a deeper track, but it's a great track.
And Jim, sorry.
Yeah, and doing my research on it, I had read a lot of the stuff that Kenneth had just said. So I was kind of shocked because it kind of reminded me, it's based on Edgar Allan Poe. It kind of went like, I never knew this, when I listened to it prior to just this weekend. I didn't realize it was necessarily about that, and kind of got me thinking a lot about plots from King Diamond albums. Nothing that sounds similar, but just the fact that it's kind of cool for a thrash band to kind of take on this topic as a bit of a horror theme. Not really in a, it's not a conception album or anything like that, but it's a pretty good conceptual song. And I think that's pretty cool. So.
And then we finish with Human Insecticide. Billy.
Yeah, kind of a good way to close the album. I mean, it just might be the fastest song on the album, one of the more intense songs. So yeah, a great way to close the album with a bang. Really just that simple. Another great thrash song on this amazing record.
And Jim?
Oh yeah, I mean, talk about ending it with a bang. I mean, this song, this is my third favorite on the album, and probably in my top 10 of my favorite my favorite Annihilator songs of all time. But yeah, ending it on this, boom, just right in your face, heavy, fast song, and that's what thrash is all about. Is exactly what this song is.
And Kenneth?
Yeah, it's I actually think this is like Welcome to Your Death Part 2 because it has the same kind of driving rhythm. They almost sound the same. It's some like almost a variation of that song. Again, but going back to the mental illness, I read this because I looked it up because I was interested in the actual human insecticide. So supposedly it's a person who's in an insane asylum and is battling cockroaches or vermin and is determined to wipe everything out. So it's funny you mentioned the mental illness part, Blake, because I think this might be the theme of the album. It might actually be mental illness, pretty much.
Well, I think a lot of the albums are, yes.
This one in particular, though, just based on
Yeah.
a lot of the lyrical content, though.
Okay, so that's the album. I like the song too. I mean, I didn't really say, since there's four of us here, I didn't really bother saying much about the songs. But yeah, Alice in Hell is like my favorite, and I like Human Insecticide, and I like Buzzsaw Blade one there because that's a great title. Now we're gonna rate the album out of 10. Let's start with Jim then.
I'm gonna go. This was probably, definitely a 10 out of 10 for me. I go back between this and Never Neverland as my two favorites. I mean, one and two, kind of the 1 and 2 punch. I like a lot, most of their catalog, but these two albums, and even the third album is really good as well and groundbreaking. But definitely a 10 out of 10.
And Billy?
So high score for me too. Not sure I would go 10 out of 10. I'd probably give it a 9 out of 10. But again, excellent score for an excellent album.
Kenneth?
Nah, I'm going 10. I agree with Jim. It is their best album pretty much in their catalog.
Agree.
And you start out with a bang for Canadian thrash. This is a pretty like serious Canadian thrash album in general. And for a debut, like this is, yeah, you can't get any better than that. So yeah, 10 out of 10.
Well, now I feel bad because I'm only giving it an
8. That's okay.
No, but just mostly only because, I like the next two albums better. And then there's also a couple more later albums that I like better. So I'm kind of rating, when I'm doing my 8 out of 10 here, I'm kind of rating it to their other albums, not necessarily, I guess, just to that album like I think you guys are, but I'm kind of going, well, I like Set the World on Fire better than this one. So I'd say I give this 8. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. I'm giving it 8.
Never Neverland's a good album too, Blake. You can't go wrong with that. So
yes, I like that one, and Set the World on Fire.
Yeah,
I mean, geez, it goes on, and we'll get to that in a second. But first, usually we talk about seeing them live, but I already know that Billy is the only one that's seen them live. So you want to talk about how many times have you seen them live, Billy?
Yeah, I've thanks to the many trips to Europe, I've probably had about 10 times. The first time I saw them was actually their first tour in Montreal, playing with Testament and Wrathchild America. So that was a killer concert. But then got to see them many times in Europe. even one time in the US. It's pretty sad. I mean, it's a Canadian band, and you know, Jeff has said this many times. Like, it's just not profitable to tour in Canada, and you know, barely in the US. And they were doing for many years 1 or 2 tours a year in Europe. So that's the only way the band can get enough people in there. So I guess a bit of a sad state of affairs to some degree, but it's great that as a band they were able to do well. It was just sort of the other side of the Atlantic, unfortunately.
Well, even the other.
Billy,
Yeah.
just a question there. Did you see them, like, were they in a lot of festivals, or like, did you ever see them at Wacken?
Yeah, no, I mean, Jeff is like a favorite of Wacken. Like, so he's played there. I've probably seen him 4 or 5 times there. But they love him so much, they invite him to host stuff like they do at the Festival of Metal Battle, where every country has a competition to send their best unsigned band. But Jeff generally hosts that for many years. So yeah, he's a favorite of the festival. I've seen him in some UK festivals as well, and Hellfest in France once as well.
Now, Billy, you told me you have a guitar of Jeff Waters. You want to tell that story?
Yeah, I do. So Jeff, so again, it goes back to this. I've been an Annihilator fan forever and always had a connection being Canadian, and Jeff was Canadian. So I think when Jeff was moving to the UK in like 2015, he was getting rid of some of his studio stuff. So, you know, we connected sort of online. We did some negotiating, and I was able to get one of his guitars that he used to do record a couple of the albums. So yeah, I was able to get that from him. He signed it all. He said, you know, he signed the case. He had a lot of like, stickers on the case for the tours he did, and he had them all signed by bands who signed it, like to Jeff and Dave Mustaine and Slayer, and so it's just a really cool piece. That's one of my favorite pieces in the collection that I like a lot.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And yeah, so none of other ones have we seen them. No, I don't even know if I even had the opportunity, because like you said about touring Canada, I don't even know if I ever remember hearing about them touring Canada, where I thought I should go see them. But now as we're talking here, I'm looking up other stuff to see if, and we usually do a top 10 list, and we are going to do one. We're going to do our top 10 Canadian metal albums or hard rock metal, depending what you decide. But as I was looking at the members list, I thought, geez, we should have rated their singers, because they had like 7 different singers. But we won't do that. But before we get to the top 10 list, does anybody want to talk about the rest of their catalog? Maybe what are your favorite albums? I mentioned briefly about Never Neverland and Set the World on Fire. But Kenneth, do you want to say maybe what is your favorite besides this one? I think you already said this is your favorite. But what are some of your other favorite ones?
Yeah, the first 4 albums are all good. I like them. But then in the 90s, it's a mixed bag, because in the 90s they did Refresh the Demon, and I don't know, some of those albums to me, I just didn't understand what the hell he was trying to do with the songs. They seemed really pencil thin. I don't know. I didn't really care for what they did. But then they had a renaissance in the 2000s when he brought in Dave Padden to play vocals, and Dave brought a really, really interesting style to the band, because he's a very versatile vocalist. Could scream, could do the death vocals, the shouts, clean singing. He was really, really good. And he also played rhythm guitar live on the shows. So, at least for a good 3 albums, it was really, really good stuff. And I love those 3 albums that came out during that period. So that was probably a period I liked. It was kind of a bummer when he left, when Dave decided to leave the band. But, I guess he felt his time was, it was time to move on to something different. But and I believe Dave had his own band previously before joining Annihilator as well. So, but that's a period that I really, really like All For You, Skizzles Deluxe. Those are 2 really, really good albums.
Now, from what I read, Dave left just because he wanted to spend more time with his family. as long as that's the truth. But that's what I read, is that's why he left. I don't think he left to be in another band, as far as I know. But Jimmy, what about some of the other albums by Annihilator?
Yeah, like Kenneth said, the first four were really, really good, and then there was a little bit of a drought. But I mean, like All For You is wicked. I've bought the compilation ones, like the Metal and the Metal 2, and they're kind of neat, but I don't necessarily classify them as full on Annihilator albums, just because there's so many guests on it. But it's kind of nice, in 2022 to have somewhat of a release to some degree. It was kind of neat. And I have most of the catalog. I'm trying to collect a few of the ones that I'm missing, some of the more least found ones here in North America.
And Billy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to sound a bit repetitive, but certainly the first four are great. But I've always been a big fan of Criteria for a Black Widow. It just always connected with me. So I think that's a good one. And maybe just, kudos to Jeff. I mean, although Jeff on vocals is not my favorite version of Annihilator.
I would agree.
But that said, I mean, the last real full studio album, Ballistic Sadistic, I thought it wasn't bad. Again, aside from Jeff on vocals, but I thought his guitar work was pretty good on that one, and I thought it was one of the better albums after sort of a couple album runs. So I don't know. I've always had a bit of a liking to that later era album as well.
Yeah, and the one that you mentioned there, the one called Metal, and then they did it again. They had all the guests on it. I do remember. I didn't refresh my memory and listen to that again, but I do know I like Arch Enemy, so I like Angela Gasso was on Couple Suicide, and I know I remembered that. I like that song anyway from that album. But yeah, there was a whole bunch of guests, and then they redid it with that singer whose name fails me right now, but from Into Eternity was his name. Yes.
Yeah.
And they had Dave Lombardo on drums at that point too, doing that Metal 2 album.
Yeah.
And I like I don't know, as I was listening to a whole bunch of albums there the last few days, like I liked like 80% of the albums, but then there's these sappy songs that it seemed to start on the second album, right? There was none on this Alice in Hell album, but starting on the second album, you get these ballads in here. And even though some of them are okay, but they still they're sappy when you're singing about lunatic asylums and this and that and crazy stuff. And then you got a love song in there kind of thing. I know it's probably not him wanting to do it. It's probably somebody telling him we need a ballad. But whatever. So like, if they would leave those songs off, there'd probably be lots of 10s, I would say, on some of the later albums. But, probably every Annihilator album would probably get an 8 from me, except for maybe, Set the World on Fire, even though that has a sappy song in it too. And Never Neverland, but whatever. But yes. Okay, so now let's get to our top 10 Canadian metal albums. And we will start with who? I don't know. Jim, let's start with you, I guess.
Okay, I'll start at 10. This is going to be great. My 10th pick is Kick-Axe, Vices. I mean, 1984. I was just a kid. It was a wicked album. Number 9, I'm going to go with Sword, Metalized, although their new album is absolutely cool too. That was, I believe, in 1986. That's a wicked band from obviously Montreal. Exciter at number 8. Go with their first album. I love, and I remember picking it up at the record store, Violence and Force. I love the cover. So freaking cool. With the hands trying to break in with a knife at the door. It's just so metal. I mean, that's 1984. Go with number 7. Go with Sacrifice in 1986. Torment and Fire. I mean, that's like another top Canadian thrash album for sure. Number 6, Razor. A lot of people would pick Violent Restitution, which I love. I mean, I love all of Razor's catalog, but I first fell in love with Razor with Evil Invaders in 1985. And I mean, that's just a wicked title track is awesome. I like Iron Hammer on that. Number 5 is Cataclysm, Shadow and Dust. I mean, that's a wicked album, 2002, a little bit newer. Number 4, I go with Hard and Heavy. A lot of people, that's their first album. I like it a little bit better than I like Metal on Metal. And huge Anvil fan. That's just my favorite one. The cover on that of Painted Black's not bad. That's pretty cool. Number 3, going with one of my favorites of all time, Voivod, Killing Technology. I could have probably filled this list with a lot of Voivod, but I wanted to keep it just down to a couple. Number 2, I'm going with Annihilator, Alice in Hell. Although I could intertwine that with Never Neverland. I like them both pretty much the same, but I'll just give it to Alice in Hell today. And my favorite Canadian hard rock metal band album is Dimension Hatros by Voivod, 1988. I mean, this is when Voivod, Warren Payne is, like, in my mind, a masterpiece. It went from Warren Payne, that raw sound. I remember the first time I heard it, blew me away. Then you're 4 albums in going into Dimension you're 4 albums in going into Dimension Hatros, and just everything kept improving as that time went on. So that's my number 1.
And let's go with Kenneth next.
Okay, sure. I went entirely all thrash. So all these albums I'm mentioning are albums that I grew up with and loved and still do to this day. So number 10, I'm going to start out with Overthrow, a very unknown, a 1-album Canadian thrash band. Grew up in Scarborough, where I grew up. Nick is a friend of mine as well, and I've been following his career from that band on to his 5 or 6 other projects now. He has Nihilist Death Cult. But this album is really, really good. It's solid. I love the album cover. That's one of the things that really attracted me to the album. It's a really good album for a 1-album kind of thrash, death hybrid, if you want to call it that. Number 9, I'm going with Entropies, Ashen Existence. Again, I'm good friends with both Dan and both Jerry, and I've talked to those guys so many times about that album. It's another album that I used to hear a lot on the Pepsi Power Hour. They used to play it all the time. Yeah, that's a great album as well. Number 8, I'm going with Infernal Majesty, and that's None Shall Defy, their first album, which is a killer thrash album. Band isn't really well known. I mean, probably not so much in the United States, but in Canada, if you're a thrash fan, you would probably know who they are. Number 7, I'm going with, again, another friend of mine, a really good friend of mine who I've been following his career for a long, long time. And that would be Mal Havoc, The Release, which they put out. Jimmy, or James, he's going by Jimmy now. But James is a incredible musician. I've always loved his work. I know he tends. I know he's putting out a new album coming out soon, but he's one of my favorite musicians in Toronto. Number 6 is another one I'm surprised you guys don't have it on your list, but Slaughter Strabato, which I think is a classic one of album. But I was telling this to Blake last week that it kind of has a connection to death, because Chuck actually did come to Toronto, and he did actually play in a band for a short time, and then knew it wasn't his scene, and then bolted back to the States, back to Florida. But I think that it's one album, but it's a killer record. I love the album art. I love all the songs. It's fantastic. Number 5, I'm going with Killer Dwarfs, Stand Tall. Love these guys. This is a very radio-friendly album, but I used to hear it all the time. I know Q107 used to play it on their Friday night show. I love that album. Number 4, I'm going with Razor, and I'm going to go with Violent Restitution, because I do feel it's their heaviest album. Again, it's not the first Razor album I heard, but for me, I found it's the most complete heavy album that they put out. Number 3, I'm going with Jim's pick is Voivod, Killing Technology, which is a fantastic album, very technical thrash. I love the album art, love all the songs. Great record. Number 2, I'm going with Sacrifice, but I'm going with Forward Determination. And for me, when Reanimation came out, that song was played to death on Much Music. They played that song so much. I love the video. I love that album. It's a step up from Torment of Fire to me. I think the guys were firing, on all cylinders of that album. And the number 1, I'm going to go with Alice in Hell, Annihilator.
Nice.
And I'll let Billy go first before me, I guess.
All right, cool. So yeah, my top 10, let's start with number 10. So it's a band out of Quebec. The band's called First Fragment. The album title, its French name, Glory Eternelle. So this band is, I guess I classify them as technical thrash, technical death metal, but with a really unique, these are all like, very well trained musicians, this technical metal mixed in with like, jazzy parts, and you even get some like flamenco guitar in there. So it's a bit of off the wall recommendation, but it just, if you like technical thrash or death, this album is a must. They just finished touring the US. I got to see them. They actually came to Toronto. Just amazing band, really unique. Number 9, going with Sacrifice, but I'm a little different here. I'm going a little later in their catalog. So for me, my favorite is Soldiers of Misfortune. So again, I just think it's a little bit more melodic than the first two, but for me, it just clicks perfectly, and it's always been my favorite Sacrifice thrash album. Number 8 for me, Cataclysm. So Jim, cool, you mentioned a great one. And just as a FYI, they played in Shadows and Dust at Wacken and just crushed. Nice. It was probably the favorite track of the whole concert. But so me, that's probably my second. I'm going to pick a bit later of Ghosts and Gods. I just like it. It's a little more mature sounding. And also kind of cool tidbit, they did win the Juno, sort of trading off with Voivod winning the Juno Award. And for our American friends, that would be the Canadian Music Award. So I guess the equivalent of the Grammys. So number 7, I'm going with a band, Martyr. And so they're out of Quebec, a 2006 album, Feeding the Abscess, just brilliant technical thrash death metal. And for those who are a fan of Chewy and Voivod, this is him and his brother's band. So they've done a couple of these technical thrash albums. And you could easily see why Voivod turned to him, because he's been sort of putting out those off-timing riffs, and he was a perfect fit into Voivod. But for any Voivod fans, you should check this thing out. The guitar playing is incredible. Number 6, Annihilator. We already talked about that. Number 5, I'm going back to technical death metal again from Quebec. A band called Quo Vadis, album Defiant Imagination. Again, as I said, technical metal, but this is kind of knowing Steve DiGiorgio, who we all know on many bands, actually played bass on this album. So he loved the music that he jumped in and did all the bass for the album. Number 4, again, going back to Quebec, a band, Oblivion, but it was EON at the end, with an album from 1990, From This Day Forward, technical thrash. This album was, I found out about it from all the American press, giving this thing a 10 out of 10. The band, in terms of progressive metal, amazing musicianship, these guys had it all. They were probably 3-4 years ahead of all the best prog bands, but unfortunately just couldn't make it. But again, people need to check this album out. It's fantastic. Number 3, again, going back to the province of Quebec, 1989, Dead Brain Cells, DBC Universe, one classic technical thrash album again. Number 2, Gorguts, again from Quebec, considered dead, really is, among all death metal fans, considered a landmark old school death metal Hell album. And also of note, we also get James Murphy showing up to play some guitar on the album, and Chris Barnes from Cannibal Corpse did some backing vocal tracks as well. And number one for me is all Nickelback albums. No, just kidding. It's Voivod for number one. And for me, a little different than the guys. I'm going one more album out. Nothing Face. For me, you know, I just really continued along the progressive music journey, but still kept enough of the older, edgy thrash. For me, this is Voivod in peak form. And maybe there's a bit of sentimental value because this is where I saw Voivod live in front of their Montreal hometown crowd for the first time. So yeah, that's my top 10. Some unique stuff, but all killer stuff.
Well, you scared me there with that Nickelback thing. I thought I was gonna have to fire you.
There you go.
I was like, oh my God.
We're done.
And I knew there'd be a Gorguts one in there. I told these guys before you showed up, I think, that there'd be a Gorguts in your list. Okay, I heard a lot of names on everyone's actually that I don't even know or I didn't pay attention to much, but
okay.
Anyway, so mine's not very well, whatever, it doesn't matter. Okay, number 10, I got Sacrifice, Forward Determination. Number 9, I have Razor and Executioner Song because I really like Take This Torch, that song. I just love that song. And I don't have any of the years written down here for most of these because I didn't bother. Annihilate, I have number 8 is Annihilator, All For You. So when I had that, it's even on my list here for that. Number 7, I have Anvil with Forged in Fire because I love that album
Great
too.
album.
Now Anvil's like, yeah, they're like one of the first Canadian bands I really got into. Anyway, number 6, I threw in, I don't know if you call them hair metal or not, but I got Helix in here with No Rest for the Wicked. Because I love that album. Number 5 is one of the newer bands, I guess. Nobody else mentioned them. Unleash the Archers with their album Apex, which was released in 2017. And that's, I don't know what, I guess they're kind of power metal with some death stuff thrown in there, some vocals. But yeah, I really like that. And of course, female vocal with Brittany Slays there. Number 4, I have Exciter, Violence and Force, which is actually their second album, Jim. They had Heavy Metal Maniac was their first album.
Right.
Came out a year before. I thought you said Violence and Force was the first one. Number 3, I got Annihilator, Set the World on Fire. Now, my number 2, nobody mentioned this group, and I love this album, and they only had like maybe 2 albums, but Pile Driver.
Oh yeah.
Metal Inquisition is my second favorite album.
That's a good choice.
That is a good choice.
Now
Nice.
it's because I love the title track, even though it's a little outdated now when you hear it. It's about going into a disco or whatever. But anyway, I still love that song. And my number 1 album is Anvil, Metal on Metal. I remember that.
Album.
And I also remember something about Anvil when I was working. I mentioned this on another podcast. I can't remember which one now, though. But I was working at a cheese factory out in the middle of nowhere in southern Ontario here in Canada. And I was looking out the window. I was like 16 years old, I guess. I was looking out the window and we were right at an intersection and there was a van turning. And I looked out and I looked at the van. On the back of the van, it said Anvil on the back. And that was the closest I ever came to seeing them live, was seeing them drive by where I was working, because I've never seen them live actually. Now I have a couple honorable mentions and you guys can throw some in later. Now most of my honorable mentions aren't really metal, I guess. So I got, well, Pickaxe, I like Vices, just like Jim said. I really like that album, but I just didn't throw it in my top 10 here. Triumph's Allied Forces is one of my favorite, and I also have Helix, Walking the Razor's Edge in here. And I really like Headpin's Turn It Loud album, which is their heavier of their 3 or 4 albums that they had. And also Diamonds. I don't know if anybody knows Diamonds, but they were kind of hair metal, kind of sleaze metal, whatever you want to call it, but with Priya Panda as a singer. And I really like that album. And I also did a photo shoot with Priya Panda once, so I wanted to throw that one in here. Anybody have any honorable mentions they want to mention?
Well, there's 3 Inches of Blood. That's an interesting band. Thor was not mentioned, which kind of should be, because he's a Canadian. He's like an iconic legend. I always like his music. But I didn't have any like Helix or Anvil, but I would have Triumph. I would have had Thunder 7 on mine. I would have definitely put Thunder 7. That's a great album. And then you were saying hair metal, Blake. What Coney Hatch would be?
Yeah.
They're a good band for their time. Yeah, that'd be mine. There's a few others like Monster Voodoo Machine, Varga, or how about newer stuff like Striker? That's an interesting new band that's been around for a while. So
I seen Varga at a small place in London. There was like 100 people there.
yeah, they went from the big time to the big zero.
Yeah.
After their record label debut, and then touring with Metallica and a bunch of bands, and then next album, no interest.
Well, most of these bands we mentioned should have been more popular, but they just weren't, probably because they're from Canada.
Yeah, sure.
Like Annihilator is probably one of the biggest selling Canadian ones that anyone's discussed. And then it was mostly Europe, like you said. It was mostly Europe that was buying their albums, not over here. Jim, did you have any honorable mentions?
Yeah, I mean, like Rush Moving Pictures. I mean, I kind of I can appreciate Rush a lot more now than I did back when I was growing up in the 80s. You mentioned Unleash the Archers. That's a wicked album, and it's a great band. I also like, I was kind of sad the Agonists broke up, because I definitely like them. Vicky Persaka's voice is awesome, but I mean, it's just a kind of a sign of the times type thing where it's hard to keep, unfortunately keep these bands going, because touring's super hard, and I mean that's where they're getting all their revenue from. So, and Helix as well, like Walking the Razor's Edge. I remember buying that. I mean, that was played on Much Music like crazy. Absolutely wicked album. And I mean, the most of Helix, and I've seen them I think I've seen them 4 times. So, and they just played here on the weekend in this 80s. They had Lee Aaron here, Helix, the Headpins with their new singer, and Street Heart and all that stuff. So it was kind of neat. But yeah, there's a few of mine there that I like as well.
And Billy, do you have any others? Or
yeah, I mean, so you guys mentioned some of them. Sword, Metal Eyes. Glad someone said 3 Inches of Blood. That's a great one. Kick Axe, Vices. I always liked also. But maybe 2 others not as known. A band called Augury, technical death metal. An album called Fragmentary Evidence, and a band that's quite popular now from Canada. They've been touring all over the US and Europe. Is also a technical death metal band called Archspire. So they're doing quite well now, 3 or 4 albums, but the last one there, Bleeds the Future, was a great one.
And Jim, Jim mentioned the Agonists. I also seen the Agonists at this same small place in Ontario that only could fit like 100 people. And I actually interviewed Vicky. I can't remember the year now. It's whatever, 8 or 9 years ago, but I interviewed her outside that place. And one of the only 2 interviews I did live, one was with her and one was with that Priya Panda girl. They were playing at the London Music Hall in London, which is a little bigger than this other place, which I don't even remember the name of it because it was so small. But actually, she is in another band. She's starting another band. I just don't know anything about what kind of music it is exactly.
Six Sense.
Yeah. Now, is there any other new bands that anybody wanted to talk about, like newer Canadian bands that we haven't mentioned already? Is there anybody that we should know about?
Letharo's a pretty good band for a Canadian up-and-coming band. They've been touring Toronto, and I think now they're touring the States a lot. I've been listening to them. I think they're pretty good. I like the vocalist. She's got a Set of pipes on her.
What was that name? Sorry.
Lutharo.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I saw. Okay.
Yeah, you probably heard of him.
Yes. Oh, and then who? Oh, Ken, you mentioned Thor. Yeah, I used to love Thor too.
Oh, Thor. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was just saying that because he is a Canadian icon to some degree. I think he's more known in the States than in Canada, for if you want my honest opinion. But you can't forget Thor.
He had a documentary on Netflix. I didn't think he was big enough to have a documentary, but he did.
Yep. That's true.
But Billy, is there any other bands you wanted to mention, or did we cover everybody?
I named two quickly. I know we're a bit tight for time, but Riot City, traditional metal out of Alberta.
Great. Yeah.
Just really making good progress, good songwriting. I love the vocalist. He can really hit the high note.
Yeah.
Just got to see them live and they were incredible. I mean,
Cool.
I've never seen a band so happy to play. I mean, in Germany, they must have been playing in front of 2,000 people in one of the smaller stages, but guaranteed the biggest show of their life, and the smile never left their face. So that was really cool. And then from Sudbury, Ontario, back to technical death metal, but this really cool band, Fractal Generator. They have an album in 2021 called Macrocosmo. So if you like sort of, it's largely a one-man band, guitar player. Of course, he brings in session musicians to help, but just, again, brilliant technical metal, but still plenty of melody and structure to keep everybody engaged. So I think that's a great up and coming band, and from all places, Sudbury, a small town to produce technical death metal. Kind of cool.
And I'll mention this for Jim. He just reviewed the Spades GT is the name of the band, and it's Rob Reiner's from Anvil's son, who's the drummer of this band, and they're from Barrie, Ontario. And you can check out our website for Jim's review of their newest album, or maybe is it their only album, or it's just the newest album? I forget.
Yeah, it's their debut album, Sewer City Radio. Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty good. So make sure you check that out. So thanks everybody for listening. Now, if you're from Canada, make sure you still check out some of these bands that you haven't heard of before. And if you're from the United States or wherever you're from, listen to everything we've said, because we need to get Canada back up on the metal map before it disappears. Okay, thanks all you guys for joining me. This is great, and we got to talk about a Canadian metal band.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody for listening.